Welcome to Thrive, a Paychex business podcast, your blueprint for navigating everything from people to policies to profits. And now, your host, Gene Marks.
All right, everybody. I'm here with Daniel Hood. Daniel or Dan? I've known you for so long.
Both, but never Danny.
Never Danny.
Never Danny.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Well, Dan is the editor-in-chief of Accounting Today. Thanks for joining. It's
Thanks for having me.
And it's great to see you after Hurricane Sandy. It's been a while.
So you got through the hurricane okay?
Got through the hurricane okay. That whole conversation has passed, but it was a pleasant 3 days in the Waldorf. Not as pleasant as yours, but that was many years ago. Glad to have you here. Why are you here? Why are you at Engage?
Engage is one of those just events that has its own gravity. It brings everybody in, and it's everything you need to know about accounting is happening in this space, and everyone you need to meet in accounting is happening in this space. And so for me, looking to cover the profession and see what's going on, it's a fantastic place to be, and to be able to walk the halls and just see everyone I might ever need to talk to or interview or learn something from.
So what stories are you getting out of Engage this year?
This year it's a little weird because I actually changed my approach to how I attend this event. I've actually got a lot more small stories from talking to different vendors and different accountants. No broad themes, but a lot of very small, detailed sort of stuff. It was a thing I'd wanted to try, just set up a bunch of individual meetings talking to people. So it ended up being a little weird, but a lot of little stuff.
What do you mean? Give me an example.
I've talked to a lot of vendors, particularly new vendors working in the AI space. And it'll eventually add up to, a bigger picture of what's going on there. But each one is taking a very different approach. And so it's hard to say, this is what I've taken away without being like, this is what this specific vendor is doing. Does that make sense?
It does. I walk around this floor here and I see a lot of the vendors that you say. And I do say to myself, they're probably not going to be around in 10 years. I mean, is that wrong to think that way?
Nope, not at all. I mean, to be fair, Engage always draws a lot of new vendors.
Yes.
And there's always a certain winnowing out process. Not everyone's going to make it to next year,
right.
let alone 5 years. But then when you look at what's going on in technology and the trends, particularly in accounting technology, there's always a sort of process of either just dropping out or being acquired by a larger brand. So a lot of brands just come and go in the profession. There's different, there's periods where suddenly everything gets bought up, and then there's more periods where it's sort of a slow accumulation. But I think you're absolutely right. I think we'll see a lot of the people here not necessarily disappearing, but just ending up being part of a larger brand or a larger stable of products.
What are you covering in AI and the accounting profession?
For us, because I follow technology because you kind of have to, right?
Sure.
But I'm not this is a great example. One of the things I learned today was some very specific things about how agents work.
Okay.
That would probably, to anybody who knows AI, be no surprise.
Okay.
But to me, I was like, holy cow, that's cool. But
agents are the story of this year. Just so you know, just to catch you up to 2025. I understand.
If it's a headline, I can get it. I get it. So, but no, I think the story of AI really for accountants is adopting, getting comfortable with it. And it's going to be a thing where it's a little bit, there's a whole story about you don't need to know how to build a watch, just need to know how to tell time. Right. For most accountants, it's just going to be about knowing how they can implement it into their practice. Right. They don't need to know how to build an agent. They don't need to know what an agent does. Right. Well, they need to know what it does, but they don't need to know how it does it.
Right.
Right. So I think that's the big story, is getting accountants to realize two things. One, that you need to adopt AI in a big way, in a bigger way than just technology, right? You can't be a grudging sort of, I'll do it because I got to do it. You've really got to get in there, because there will be firms that will absolutely get in there first.
Sure.
And they talk about AI is going to take away people's jobs. It's not AI that's going to be taking away jobs. It's accounting firms using AI that's going to be taking away work and so on. Right. So I think that's the big story, is the need for firms to adopt and get. I'm not going to force them to be enthusiastic about it, but they need to embrace it seriously and take it seriously and work it into everything they're doing.
The demographic of accounting firm partners skews older. I think the average age of the U.S. small business owner is 56 years old, according to it's old. So there's a lot of succession planning, but then there's also a lot of change management issues. People just don't want to change. Are you seeing that?
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah. And to be fair to as fair to accountants as we need to be, this is true everywhere, right? Very few people like change, right? I think it's much more true of accountants in part because that's just their nature of their profession. It is a small c, conservative, careful, assess every risk before you do anything kind of thing. That's one of the reasons it's so useful to their clients.
Sure.
Right? But it's also, for the longest time, for generations, accounting firms didn't have to change, right? In ways that most other industries did have to at some point or another between roughly 1930 and call it 2000. Most other industries went through some changes or other. Accounting did not.
Right.
So for the older generation, you talk about the higher up.
Yeah.
They never had to change, and their bosses never had to change. So it's not built into their DNA to sort of say, well, at some point we're going to face a change. Now they're facing this enormous tsunami of change, just as every other industry is.
Sure.
But they have no history of it,
Sure.
and they have no muscles for it. And that's why that change management skill, people ask, what's the biggest thing for accountants? I think building the muscle for change management, learning how to do it, because it's not just going to be one change. And once you finish adapting to this change, there's going to be another one, and another one, and another one. And they're going to be in totally different areas of your practice. Sometimes it'll be a new service area. Sometimes it'll be a new form of recruiting. Sometimes it'll be a new way of marketing. Sometimes it'll be new technologies. But to be able to assess developments, to decide, does this matter to me? Is this going to impact me? Figure out who it's going to impact, figure out who should lead the change.
Sure.
Having that as a muscle, I think, is something that every business, certainly, but accountants in particular, I think are going to need to work really hard to develop.
What about you? You using AI in your job or in your life?
We're experimenting with it a little bit, and the more I experiment with it, the more terrified I am about it. And not terrified, but it's just one of those things where you realize there is a ton of stuff that almost everybody does. If you're working behind a desk, right? If you're not literally out digging ditches or working with your hands.
There's a lot of stuff that AI can replace.
Yeah, absolutely. And to a certain extent, why wouldn't you? Let's do it. Because there's still time to ride it, right? To be in charge of it. And that's, I think, is the big thing that goes back to, I was thinking earlier about the fact that accounting firms need to adopt this, because otherwise somebody else will do it and they'll get ahead of you.
100%. Do you think it's going to replace people?
This is one of those things, I think eventually, when you add it all up, we'll discover that it has replaced people. But it's really going to replace tasks. It's going to take care of tasks. There will be plenty of other work to do. We talked about, in any period of major change, right? Other jobs pop up. You talk about, the mechanization of agriculture, right?
Agreed.
Yes, a lot of we didn't need as many field hands as we did, but suddenly we needed people to pack vegetables or to run railroads to move.
I'll give you an example. Back in France, the 19th century, there was a bunch of knocker-uppers. Now, it's not what you think.
I know, you're going to tell people what that means.
The knocker-uppers,
suddenly we're working blue.
They would shoot pebbles at people's windows to wake them up in the morning because there was no alarm clocks.
Right.
Well, obviously, those knocker-uppers were put out of business once alarm clocks came along. Technology does replace people, but then people seem to find other stuff to do that makes them smarter or better or more money.
And probably because in the same spirit of innovation and drive of innovation that's creating the new things that take away the jobs, he's also working in other areas and it's generating new jobs there. So, I mean, I think we're okay. Now, people get caught in the cracks there, right? Individuals will definitely have experiences that will not be positive, but overall, as sort of an economy, it works. So far, it's worked for us.
The profession, as you've been writing and covering for a while now, is facing, as continues to face an enormous recruiting issue. And we are, there's been recent news that might be turning around. And it makes me laugh because when I talk to some people in the profession, they're like, yeah, oh my gosh, it's it might be turning around. And as if the weather changed or something. They don't even know why. It just it's happening or whatever. Why do you think the profession has had such challenges recruiting people?
Some of this is about change and the profession's lack of recognition of what change is coming along. I don't think it took accounting firms a long time to recognize that the engine that had brought new people into it was slowing down and eventually not failing, because obviously people are still coming to accounting, but nowhere near the numbers that they used to. And I think it took a long time for people to recognize that. And the interesting thing there, and this is a weird little offshoot that I always think about, is the degree to which technology masked that. Right, because accounting firms were getting way more productive all through the 90s and in the first 2-3 decades of this century because of technology. And I think that masked a lot of the drop in capacity, right? Because suddenly, yes, you were getting half as many people coming into the profession, but the people in the profession, and the people in the profession were twice as efficient. So we didn't realize, wait, this is a serious problem. Now it's catching up. There's too much work, way too much work for accountants to do, which is a great problem to have if you can do it. and that's where that capacity problem is suddenly really coming into people's faces.
What you're saying is that we had this problem. It was growing over years. Technology was masking it.
Right.
So the profession was not paying attention to it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they woke up and they were like, oh no, we don't have enough people.
And suddenly we didn't realize, oh wait, and this gets to the real question, right, which was why do we have fewer people coming into the profession? There's a couple of very obvious answers. One is salaries. We're terrible. Not terrible, but I mean, compared to a similar job that you could go into in technology or finance, both of which expanded enormously over the course of the 90s and then since. You could say, wow, I can get a much better paying job that's much more glamorous and exciting, very serious air quotes there, in technology or in finance. So when we did a salary survey recently and discovered, that the entry-level salaries for young accountants were $10,000 to $15,000 below similar jobs in tech, finance, and just literally business as a whole. For a similar type of thing, you were getting less than you were getting in public accounting.
And by the way, that was just the salaries. When you actually convert it to wages per hour, when you look at the hours people put in during busy season.
Exactly. And that's the other, right? This is the other big problem. This demands a lot of work of you.
Right.
In a way that, yes, law firms demand a lot of work of you, for instance.
They paid a lot more.
But the pay is much, much bigger.
Yeah.
Just the working conditions were terrible for a long time. Firms are getting better about that, but it's a badge of honor.
It is.
To say, hey, I
Which
worked
is
a million
ridiculous.
hours.
And by the way, it's a badge of honor, maybe guys our age, because that's like part of our generation.
Right.
But I don't know. I think people like my kids' age or people in their 20s, they're like, that's not a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to take a job where I'm working 80 hours a week or, for 4 months. Like,
This is the culture of a Japanese prisoner of war camp.
Yes, literally. Why would I want to do that anymore? Because they're like, which is proof that each generation gets smarter than the generation before it.
Absolutely. I remember when the millennials came into the workforce, and every accountant every older accountant was complaining about them because they didn't want to work 80 hours a week. And I'm like, why would they want to work 80 hours a week?
Maybe they have a better outlook on life than we do.
I'm like, they want to see their children. We talked to managing partners of firms or older partners of firms, and they'd be like, well, they just don't want to work. And I'm like, no, they don't want to work crazy hours.
Yes.
And to be honest, if you could easily even then arrange your workflow so that it didn't happen, or it only happened to a minimal degree.
Yeah.
But the profession wasn't ready for that. It's getting better about it. But
you talk about a badge of honor as well. Like it was always the thing about like how busy season was busy. Oh, don't bother during busy whatever.
Yeah.
Now, I look at firms and I talk to some other CPAs that are like, don't bother me, I'm super busy during busy season. I'm like, well, you're like just not really good at managing your workflow, are you?
Yeah,
does it all have to be during busy season? Is it possible you could, give a little bit lower fees if you were doing the work in May or June and therefore have a better balance of life and recruit more, So I just don't think it's such a great thing to just say that you're just so busy during busy season. Right. It's like, not something to show off on. So technology was masking it. There was lousy compensation, all that kind of stuff. So you think that's changing?
I do. I think compensation only recently. I don't think people realize what a problem compensation was until recently. There was a little weird thing there for when, like I said, when the millennials came in, it was strange. People said, well, the millennials don't value money. They value experiences and I was like, they may not value money as much, but they still value money. But so the profession is getting better about that over the last couple of years.
Not to interrupt you, but like my son's a manager at PwC, so he's been there now for like 6 years. They like throw money at him left and right that I never got when I was at KPMG. Like, you know what I mean? Like, good behavior. Here's a $500 Amazon gift card or whatever. So you're right. Firms are smartening up a little bit about that.
And the big four firms were ahead of that. That trend for good. I mean, they needed to be. But the profession is generally smaller firms are catching on. But I think just the work environment was awful. That's getting better.
How about certifications? What do you think that? I mean, some people complained that the requirements to get certified as a CPA was just, it became onerous or it became out of control. And by the way, again, my personal story, my kid went to Pitt and he had to get, I don't know, a certain amount of hours. Like, he graduated with it as an accounting major, but to sit for the CPA exam in Pennsylvania, he had to take another year at Pitt to get a master's in accounting to be able to sit for it. And I was like, dude, so now I got to pay for another year?
Yeah.
Like, that's not good.
I mean, that was nationwide. Those released. Now, there's an interesting, I think there's some interesting thoughts about the fifth year, and did it make sense for the profession, and did it make sense for, and I think at the time, they made strong arguments for it. And I think there's good reasons to think, would that be good to have a profession that was a little higher, upskilled? I think you can see it. The problem with a lot of the states was that the extra hours had nothing to do with
Nothing.
accounting. It was basket weaving or whatever you wanted to. It wasn't. I hope nobody took actual basket weaving, but literally it could have been because there were no requirements.
It's so true.
I think I will be honest when I say I think that while that I'm sure that turned a number of people off, I think it was not as big an influence, and one that needed to change, and states are changing that now, and we're going to a very quick process.
Okay.
Very soon, I think we'll see most states have switched to some alternative. You can do the 150-hour and get your CFR license that way, but there'll be other ways to do it without having to take that 5th year.
So it's not just one thing; it's a combination of different factors, and it's improving. You're saying,
yes.
That's what you're saying,
and like I said, we're seeing improvement on the credentials thing.
Yeah.
I think that was more of a very recent problem because of student debt being such a big issue over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I think over the long term, it was less of an issue.
Got it.
It's only recently that it became a big sticking point for a lot of students who were like, I can't afford a 5th year. I could barely afford the first 4 years.
Yeah, and I was the parent paying for the college, and I was like a little annoyed.
Right.
Okay, so you deal with a lot of accountants. You deal with a lot of accounting firms. You've been doing this for 80 years, 90 years? How long have you been doing this?
200 to 300 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of experience in the industry. What firms stick out in your mind, without naming names, that are just crushing it, that you're like, these guys run a really good business, and they're going to be around for a while running a good business? What are some of the characteristics?
It's interesting because I would say and it's not a formal thing, but there's always around a dozen firms that we're sort of looking at. I literally just watched one of them walk by.
Okay.
Or I
With a drink in their hand, by the way, at this point.
Exactly. Well, and they deserved it. They're a great firm. But I think what's really interesting to me is, like I said, there's this roughly dozen or so firms that we're always sort of thinking of as these are the great firms. And it changes. That cohort changes from time to time. What's fascinating to me is that there are different reasons for some of those firms are looking to go, hey, they're a technology firm, right? And they get it. They're super deep into technology.
Meaning like internal technology or external, like they're a consulting technology firm?
Often both.
Okay.
Which makes sense when you think, right? It just makes sense for somebody who's like, I'm great with this with my clients. Why wouldn't I do this internally? Or vice versa. I can do all this stuff internally. I want to share it with my clients. Not always so, but often. Okay. So that's one. There's a couple of firms that we think that do amazing things there. There are firms that are doing amazing things with their staff. Okay. Just doing everything right, bringing people in young, giving them authority and responsibility, and making them feel like owners of the firm long before they're owners of the firm. So there's handful of firms that we just think are just spectacular at that.
I love that.
There are firms that are great with their clients that have just a strong sense of usually a narrower base of clients, right? They figured out the niches they want to be in and the people they want to serve, and they're killing it. Yeah. And they may not be great at technology, and they may not have the greatest, they may not make a best firms to work for list, though usually they're pretty good. Yeah. But they just really know what they're doing with their clients. I think there's a lot of different ways to be a great firm. Right. Sometimes it's pioneering new service organizations, and those firms may not be as great in 5 years as that new service becomes more widespread. But so it's neat because there's a lot of different ways to be sort of a great firm in one way or another. So
it's technology, culture, relationship with your clients, knowledge, expertise that you have, and it could be one or a combination of some of those things, but at least one of those things.
Exactly. And the firms that stay longest in that sort of list of firms that we're keeping an eye on, are the ones that do more than one thing or do a lot of those things really well. I will say you mentioned culture, and I'm glad you said that word because I didn't really.
Well, you kind of alluded to it when you talking about a great place to work.
As itself, that's a really strong and important thing, to know who you are and what you want to be. One of the firms I've been talking to a lot over the past 6 months, and previously, but over the last 6 months in particular, a ridiculously strong culture. A culture that they've written down. So that's a great question. I think it is, again, one of those things. It's annoyingly complicated. It's a lot of different pieces. Okay. For them, I think one of the things, and again, without naming names or going too deeply into it, they have literally written down the behaviors they want. In a bunch of different areas. And it's I'm not saying every firm needs to do this, but they have a very clear set of this is how we deal with each other, this is how we deal with clients, this is the way we speak, this is the way we act, these are our priorities.
And I'm assuming they live it as well.
Oh, right? And that's the thing. Yes, they have this list, and they live the heck out of it. It's crazy. And one of the reasons it's been on my mind a lot is because I talked to a number of different people from the firm, and each one of them was that way.
That's great.
And it was
great.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I think that's saying who you are, what you want to be, how you want to deal with each other.
Sure.
One of the important things about culture is it has to be not just what we expect from you.
What about ourselves?
But we're going to give what we're going to do for you and what we expect of ourselves. It goes into a million different areas. It goes into how you treat clients. It goes into how you treat staff. It can't be. We're a family firm. Everyone here feels like we're a family. We care about our employees. We care about our clients. That's just too vague, right? And I think a lot of firms stop there. That's a good start. But you need to go beyond it. When you say we care about our clients, well, what does that mean?
Sure.
Does it mean, and this is sort of the example I always use, you care about your clients and you care about your staff. Well, of course you do.
Yeah.
No one would ever say, I don't really care about my staff.
Right.
But the question is, somebody's supposed to deliver you something in the morning on Friday, and you've agreed to return it around and give whatever delivery you want by the end of the day.
Sure.
As clients do, they don't deliver it until the end of the day.
Yes.
So the question is, if you really care about your clients, do you say, all right, we're just going to work through the night and deliver this to you as soon as we can? It might be Saturday morning, but that's where we're at. But what does that mean for your staff?
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Or do you say, if you really care about your staff, do you say, listen, we got it. We will get this to you as soon as possible, but our staff doesn't work on the weekends. So we will do it as early as possible Monday morning. We'll turbocharge things for you, but we can't. And those are the cultural decisions.
That's a really good issue to bring up because, it depends on who your priority is.
Right.
And I have those issues in my own firm as well. You have client demands, but I don't want to upset my own people that are working for me. They have lives as well. So if a client is being unreasonable, who do you care more about?
Yeah.
I actually care more about my people, my staff. I'd rather they be happier. So you're not a CPA.
I'm not.
Let's assume you quit your day job as editor-in-chief of Accounting Today.
Right.
You sit for the CPA exam. You
Can I do
pass
this now?
it with flying. Yeah, right now. And you pass it with flying colors. You're crushing it. You're not going to go into practice as a CPA. You've been reporting on this profession for all this time. What kind of a firm would you run? What would you specialize in? What would you do?
Literally in terms of
You're going to hang a shingle. What would you do?
I would go with forensic accounting just because I think that's
Forensic
that's
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
You mean just like in general, like fraud in general?
Yeah, any kind of fraud thing.
Doesn't it fascinate you when
endlessly.
people commit crimes that you're like, how did they, I guess that's why we love The Godfather. There's just something about that.
This is a weird way to put it, and I know no one ever agrees with this. There is a certain weird moral courage to take. It's a weird kind of, maybe it's an amoral courage, but it's like to be able to steal from somebody who's trusted you.
And then sleep like a baby at night.
Yeah, and you know about, I'm sure I've heard about like the fraud triangle and all the things that go into the justifying it for, but it's like, I've never been able to do that. I've done it. I've justified stupid things in my own life, but nothing like
I think
stealing $100,000.
I think that's the why like true crime podcasts are so popular. You know what I mean? Because we all are just fascinated by people that commit crimes and how they do it and live with themselves after doing it. So forensic accounting is great. All right, that is a great answer. All right, final question. I'll let you go. Where'd you go to college?
Georgetown.
I went to Georgetown. I was just telling a story about Georgetown. Anyway,
a good one. I hope something about
it's for another time.
Or an Exorcist-related story.
You go back in time to Georgetown the day after you graduate college. You want to give your younger self some advice. And by the way, let me temper this question saying you have made a success of your life. You are doing you are doing great. So maybe your advice is don't do anything different because why would I want to change where I ended up? But if you were to give yourself advice at that age, what would you say?
I would say it's interesting. In general, as you say, I couldn't be happier with the way I could be happier with the way it turned out if I'd married a supermodel and was a millionaire. But no, I generally say things have worked out pretty well. So but I definitely, and this is actually, it's weird because this is advice that I think we have to give young accountants as well, which is that I would tell myself to be much more intentional about my career. I fell into a lot of things, and it worked out really well. Genuinely, I've been super lucky.
But it might not have.
It might not have. Yeah. I could have made mistakes, and if I had been more intentional about what I was doing, I think I might have gone further. I might have been, achieved more. Not that I don't feel like I've achieved stuff.
No, that's great.
And I think this is 100% applicable to current accountants, because for a long time the accounting profession set your career for you.
Yeah.
Right? You just knew where you were going to go. Everyone knew how it worked. The structure of the firm managed your career for you up to a certain point when you had to say, do I want to be a partner or will they have me as a partner?
Sure.
But nowadays, young accountants have so many options that they really have to take a lot more control of their careers themselves.
Great.
And set them up. So.
Great advice. I'm done. Dan, that was great.
All right, that was a pleasure,
Thank
man. That
you
was good
very
stuff.
much. I appreciate it.
Do you have a topic or a guest that you would like to hear on Thrive? Please let us know. Visit payx.me/Thrive Topics and send us your ideas or matters of interest. Also, if your business is looking to simplify your HR, payroll, benefits, or insurance services, see how Paychex can help. Visit the resource hub at paychex.com/works. That's WORX. Paychex can help manage those complexities while you focus on all the ways you want your business to thrive. I'm your host, Gene Marks, and thanks for joining us. Till next time, take care.
This podcast is property of Paychex Incorporated 2025, all rights reserved.